his own podcast, and you really been involved with the Browns for quite a while, haven't you?
Yes, I have. Yeah, we've been writing now for a couple of years, and by the way, my cousin Jeff will be really happy that you, instead of John, but that's all good. No,
did I say Jeff?
Yes, you did, but but that's great because Jeff is a diehard Browns fan as well.
He is. Okay, yeah. John Suchan, apologize about that.
Thank you for having me on the show.
I'm really excited.
Much appreciated.
There really is a lot to talk about with the Browns this week, but even this year. I mean, there have been Super Bowl expectations. Maybe that's changed. And it was, with this just crazy news this week, let's just go ahead and rip the Band-Aid right off right away. All right.
Yeah.
Talk about Odell Beckham's departure and just about a little bit about that drama.
Well, I write for the Dog Pound Daily, like I mentioned, and I've got a couple articles coming out this afternoon. So if you check out that website, but one of the things I did say about OBJ was just what a relief for a lot of fans. It's been a lot of anxiety, and he came in with a lot of promise, but he had a very big, he has a big platform, a big character guy, and so there was a lot of hope. Obviously, the Browns have a very good team. And he had a good first, year when he was with the Browns, did a lot of things. He had decent numbers, got over 1,000 yards receiving. Then had a lot of things happen the last 2 years, had the injury last year that he suffered. And then all of a sudden Baker Mayfield goes on this tear. And for the rest of last season, it was, well, do we really need OBJ? He comes back this year, doesn't come right back at the beginning of the year. People were anticipating him coming back with the game against the Chiefs. I think he started in that game against the Bears, maybe. I think your favorite there was a lot of Baker or Odell Beckham jerseys there at the stadium, and he hasn't really done a lot. And there's been a lot of talk about that connection between the two players. I think at this point, everything that happened, I mean, it was just a wild, crazy week. I mean, the guy's 29 years old, and he's got his dad putting out messages on Instagram, and just a weird vibe this week. So the Browns, they did a lot of renegotiating with his agents, and he's departing. I guess he'll be a free agent as of Monday, I think at 4:00. And so everyone's, the fans that really love OBJ are wondering, is he going to go to one of our rivals here in the AFC North? So
yeah, I mean, if he went to the Ravens, that would be that would be hard, wouldn't it be?
Oh, any of those teams. I'm hoping, I think the Lions are first up. They've got people are hoping. Some folks are like, well, put him with the Lions, but we'll see. I mean, I think. Obviously, OBJ's had a great career. He had a great time with the Giants, and a lot of us fans were hopeful and supportive of the relationship that he had with the Browns, especially Baker Mayfield. They did a lot of working together in the offseason. They even took a trip back in September out west with his group of buddies there from the Browns. So it's sad a little bit, but these guys are professionals, and everything that happened this week was just really bizarre. So another chapter in the OBJ book that we'll all be looking back at, interestingly, I think, over the next several years. So
yeah, you kind of, it's so interesting, all the different stories that come out, and, the national media is saying, he's not a good teammate. He was just kind of, doing his own thing. But then I think Anthony Schwartz, had tweeted that he basically took him under his wing from the start.
Yeah.
And Jarvis Landry, one of the best teammates ever. So
yes,
I don't know if it's maybe just the wide receivers and then the rest of the team, you
get this message too, this mixed message of some out there have said that, OBJ was kind of running his own routes at times, or he was confused. I mean, all of us can watch the games firsthand. I've had a chance to be there at the stadium and watching some of these plays, and prior to the snaps, or when they're in the huddles or whatnot, OBJ would sometimes seem like he wasn't sure where he was going to go, or he was out of the huddle with the rest of the team was in the huddle. So there, I'm sure that there are a lot of positives, and I've heard and seen a lot of those same folks that have given him lots of props and said he's a really good teammate. I just, obviously it didn't work here in Cleveland, and if he goes somewhere else and he blows it up and he gets, six touchdowns with who knows? Maybe he'll end up with the New England Patriots again, and that seems like to be always the place that players go.
Right. And I was just kind of reading a little bit about, they structured his contract so that, he's going to be free agent at the end of the season, and they did reduce his salary.
Yeah.
So it's almost, unlikely that he would be, claimed on waivers. So, maybe they have that opportunity to go to the Patriots or, dare I say, the Ravens.
If that happens, it happens. And, I think everything that the Browns have a very talented team, and they're just having a hard time right now getting everything put together. I think Kevin Stefanski, the Browns head coach, is experienced some of that sophomore slump. My take on it a lot, especially recently in the last couple of weeks, is that I haven't been hearing from the Browns inside the locker room, or even when they're reporting out, like taking it one game at a time. We're going to win the week. Last year that was what you kept hearing from everybody, all the players, the coaches. They would say, we're going to win the week. And now today we're talking about a desperate win. I mean, this is a crisis. They got to get a win against the Cincinnati Bengals. And well,
yeah.
So it's I don't like the fact that it seems like Stefanski's gone away from that mindset, and maybe he's still preaching that to the players, but you're certainly not getting that vibe, now. And that has me somewhat concerned. I think Kevin Stefanski's had a really great career coming up to this point, and he had a fantastic year. He took everybody by surprise last year. So we'll see what happens. It is a big game for both clubs tomorrow, and obviously I think it's a bigger game for the Browns.
And you talked a little bit about Stefanski. It's been a lot of drama this year, but you've certainly been through a lot of different coaches. What has been the difference, that Stefanski has made as opposed to some of the other Browns coaches?
Well, I call him Steady Eddie. That's like my old uncle. He used to have a guy that, my Uncle Eddie, who would just, he just was just always steady. You're just always steady. And doesn't get too high, doesn't get too low, but has gotten buy-in from his fellow coaches and from his players. And it's just that aura about him. And he's had a really good track record, and he went to a really, he's a smart kid. Everything you read about him growing up, that he was top of his class. He just, he instinctively, he understands the game, the X's and the O's. And just as a guy that a lot of people can buy into, and obviously with what happened last year, everything's better when you're winning,
right?
And the whole thing this season was, after the Browns lost the one game, I think it was against the Chargers, and they followed that up, or they lost 2 games in a row, which hadn't happened yet in Stefanski's career, which is not a huge deal. But everyone was like, well, he's never lost 2 games in a row. Well, now that's happened. So now people are starting to question his play calling. I have somewhat of a concern. Analytically, we're looking at like the 4th down plays. That's there's been a run of those where Stefanski was basically every time there was a 4th down, especially early in the games, he was going for it. And we don't have a very good percentage on that right now. And you contrast that to a play late in the game last week against the Steelers. It was, I think, 4th and 1 at like midfield, and he chose to punt. And everyone's like, wait, what's going on? So I think Stefanski's here to stay. I've been fully on board behind him. And I think he'll turn things around. I could be wrong, and we could be on to another coach eventually, but he seems to be he's won the fan base over. I think at this point he's some of these little things that he's doing were really being critical, and then you start losing, especially then to your rival last week against the Steelers, and it's like, oh my gosh. But the team is 4-4. They're going to a game similar to last year when they played the Cincinnati Bengals, who in that game was when OBJ got injured, and then Baker Mayfield, who he missed his first 5 or 6 completions, and then OBJ gets hurt, and then all of a sudden Baker Mayfield goes on throwing 21 straight completions, and finishes off with a end of the game, 15 seconds to go to Donovan Peoples-Jones, the Browns wide receiver in the end zone to win the game. So does that happen again? Hopefully, we get a win. I don't want to take it down to the last second like last year, but I could see them going on a run. I think I mentioned in my article that's coming out this afternoon, I think Baker Mayfield, I got my fingers crossed that it'll be like the parting of the Red Sea and that he'll see the field again. He won't have that. I think that psychologically, Baker Mayfield's a very psychological, emotional guy. And maybe now the fact that OBJ is out of there, at least for momentarily, it'll be a better game for him tomorrow.
Now, yeah, with the offense, you've only are you concerned about the points? The last couple of weeks, 17, 15, and in my regular podcast, we tried to pick this game coming up, and it was hard for me to really give the Browns a lot of points because of that. So you're concerned?
Oh yeah, absolutely. This game could go two ways. Last season we saw a few games where and even this season they've scored 40 points, 30 points, and then our defensive secondary can't stop anybody either. But then you have these games like last week. The Browns, I'm very concerned. I think so if you go back 2 games ago when Case Keenum stepped in, the backup quarterback for the Browns, and they played the Broncos. Now, they didn't light it up, but Case Keenum was, quick with his decision-making. And that's one thing that I've been critical about Baker, especially this year. And maybe part of that is because of the OBJ thing. But he's also coming off this serious injury that he's still playing with. And I think a lot of people he's trying to overlook, maybe, I don't know. I don't know Baker Mayfield personally, but if you've got a messed up shoulder, even if it's your opposite shoulder, it's still going to mess you up a little bit. So I think, I mentioned in the article today that I'm posting that, the Browns really need to concentrate on the run. They've got the best running backs in the league. They lead the league with yards per rush. Right now it's at 161, I think, per game, which is a little bit down. They were at 170 yards per game a week or two ago. But that's still, if you look at, overall, like in the history of the game, the Browns right now have, they did have 3 years, 1958, 1963, and this year currently that they're in the top 10 of rushing yards per game. So they only gave Nick Chubb 16 carries last game. And I got to give the Steelers some credit. Our offensive line for the Browns is a little messed up. And but they got to establish the run. The Jets last week went over 400 yards passing, 500 yards of offense. So do the Browns try to throw through the air to start the game like sometimes they have?
Yeah, it sounds like there is, a blueprint right there to beat the Bengals then on the ground. And, the Browns really do have that. Right now they've got Chubb and, Hunt's hurt. Talk about that pairing there, when they're healthy. Who is better? Is Chubb better or Hunt better?
Oh, I'm hands down. I'm a hard and slow guy for Nick Chubb, and I think if you ask most diehard, fans that have, especially older fans, like I would be in that category that have watched the Browns over the years. Nick Chubb, his instincts and his ability to read the defense and find the gaps are phenomenal. He's a better running back than Derrick Henry. I can have that. Wow. I can have that discussion another time. But Derrick Henry's a great running back and he can bulldoze. But Nick Chubb just has he has a cerebral thing that I can't explain it. You just when you watch him day in and day out, week in and week out, it's just phenomenal. Now that's why it kind of surprised me in the game against Pittsburgh. There were at least 2 runs where he was like on the verge of breaking it, but I got to give the Steelers credit. They got into the backfield and broke up a couple plays. So I think he had like 61 yards for the game.
Was it his ankle still kind of hurting a little bit? Or
I think so. It's that calf. Both he and Hunt both have calf injuries. Hunt probably won't be back at least probably until they say the Lions game or even the Ravens game. So, but both, it's nice to have that compliment. If you look at the, Chubb's 4 years, He nearly hit 1,000 yards his first year. He had almost 1,500 yards and lost the title for running title to Derrick Henry that year in 2019. Last year he was over 1,000 yards and he missed 4 games. This year he's close to 600 yards, 584. He's got 4 touchdowns. So I mean, you look at Hunt. I mean, that's the nice thing is Hunt is the guy that you dump the screen passes off to. And last year he had 840. No, he had 304 yards receiving and 5 touchdowns, 841 yards rushing, and six touchdowns. So it's such a great combination. And now you throw in D'Ernest Johnson, who is this rookie guy that was catching fish down in Key West like 2 years ago. I mean, you look at D'Ernest Johnson's background. He went to South Florida, had a decent career there, but I mean, the games that he's played in so far for the Browns have been phenomenal. I mean, he came in when Nick Chubb a year ago played against the Dallas Cowboys, and he had almost 100 yards rushing in that game. And he came in like in the second quarter. He had 146 yards in the game that he substituted when they played against the Broncos. So you're not losing a lot. And he got the touchdown last week.
Well, how much is that on him, or is it on the offensive line?
See, and that's the thing. It's like, yeah, I mean, I think that the Browns offensive line has been stellar over the last 2 seasons. So, I mean, I again, what happened last week, they've had some substitutions. They had Jack Conklin, offensive lineman, who was injured, came back for that game, and now he re-injured. He injured his elbow, so he went out of that game in the first half, I think. And so that did have an effect. So, I mean, you got to give props to the Browns offensive line for them. I mean, they're averaging 161 yards over 8 games, top probably 15, 20 all time for in the NFL. So I don't see that running game getting worse. I mean, I think that they're going to have to. That's what Cleveland is. It's relying on the run. We're blue collar. It's getting colder.
Back to like Ernest Biner days, right?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Kevin Mack, Ernest Biner, yeah.
Oh,
those are the days that a lot of us older fans look back at. And so when I see Nick Chubb, if you start looking at the stats for Nick Chubb, and outside of, and I've written about this in the Dog Pound Daily, if you want to go back and read it, but he won't catch Jim Brown. Jim Brown's up there, 12,000, I think, total yards, but he's blasting up the charts. And if he continues to average, close to 100 yards a game, I mean, he'll be number 2 on that list if he can stay healthy.
Yeah, that's a big thing with running backs. And it really seems like the Browns continue to stockpile running backs. I mean, Demetric Felton, he's been, there's a lot of buzz around him too, right?
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. He's fun to watch. People are comparing him now to the old Eric Metcalf or Josh Cribbs with his ability to the touchdown. Demetric Felton, I think he had one. Was it against the Bears in that game where he basically had about 5 moves and twists and turns and got into the end zone on a little screen pass, I think.
Thanks for reminding me, by the way.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was the game or not, but but no, Felton, he and then Anthony Schwartz, the kid that they got out of Auburn, they've been using both of them in the kickoff returns now, and I think Felton's been mostly used. Well, last game I think they were using Schwartz exclusively for both kickoffs and punts, if I'm correct. Okay. So they've been kind of fiddling with that. The Browns were using Donovan Peoples-Jones, the wide receiver, who now with OBJ coming or leaving, there was all this talk coming into the season. Donovan Peoples-Jones, could he be the number 2 receiver behind, with OBJ? He had a great training camp, and then he comes into the season. The first 4 games, he was targeted 4 times. The first 4 games of the season. Then he had a really good game. I'm trying to remember which game, but it was the following 2 weeks. I think he had almost 100 yards receiving. I didn't write that down, but basically, he came in, and then prior to the game against the Cardinals, Well, he's warming up. He pulls a hammy, and he's been out for the last 2 weeks. So now OBJ's gone. So now everyone's coming back to Donovan Peoples-Jones saying, could he be the guy? And right now he's got 200 yards receiving. It's not a ton, but he's got half a season left if he can stay healthy. I mean, it is a hamstring, so that is a little bit concerning. So
Jarvis Landry just not that number one receiver caliber then?
He is. I mean, when you got OBJ, now he's not. And boy, he got slammed this last week. It's that, toasted after what happened on Sunday, dropping passes, getting the fumble stripped. I mean, that was a huge momentum shift in that game. The Browns were, 3 minutes out. They needed a touchdown. He had the ball at the 20-yard line, and Joe Schobert, the former Cleveland Brown, who was the linebacker, got the strip. So that was a little bit sort of, oh boy, a former Brown. It has to always be that former Brown, or like the Browns used to have Joe Hayden, the cornerback, and now he's having the best years of his life playing for the Steelers. Jarvis Landry, that'll be interesting. A lot of people are talking about that because he's best friends with OBJ. How is this going to play for him psychologically? I've suggested that maybe, that Landry will want out. Their friendship goes way back.
LSU,
and I know everyone keeps talking about the business side of things, and I get that, but I'm questioning, well, okay, the Browns are bringing in some new receivers, maybe, and they're going to be looking at receivers come, draft time probably. And what does Jarvis want to do? And he obviously has had a positive effect here in Cleveland. He was one of the first guys that came to Cleveland when they were pulling in players after they drafted Baker Mayfield. And there was a huge amount of buzz when he came here and started training with the team. I mean, I went to training camp that first summer, and I mean, everybody wanted to get Jarvis Landry's autograph. There were huge crowds of people around him, and he's been a real positive figure. He does a lot in the community. So,
and where do like Higgins and Schwartz fit in? Like, could Schwartz kind of ascend to one of those top receivers, or does he have that kind of talent? Or
he's young and raw, and he knows how to run. He's a sprinter by trade too. I think he ran track when he was in Auburn, so he doesn't have the instincts, from what I've seen. And now, the first game of the season, they play the Kansas City Chiefs, and, Baker Mayfield, I think, hits him twice on a few deep balls. And everyone's like, oh my gosh, and I even wrote an article about Anthony Schwartz. If you go back and look in the archives of the Dog Pound Daily, and he hasn't done anything really since week one. Now he's been taking punts and kickoffs, but, I think he can build into that. He's a rookie. I mean, it's like the same with Demetric, Felton, Hollywood Higgins. That's what we call it here. Because we call him Hollywood.
Stealing that from the Ravens, huh?
Yeah. So everyone, whenever he catches the ball here in Cleveland, they all say Hollywood, and he's a good receiver, and he's had this chemistry with Baker Mayfield over the years. So the last time the Browns have played that game that they won it down in Cincinnati last year, Higgins and Peoples-Jones came up big. Higgins for sure got a few big grabs there in that game. So I could see both Higgins and Peoples. Obviously, those two, Peoples-Jones and Higgins, are going to be big.
Well, let's talk about another set of pass catchers. One that maybe hasn't done a lot in I don't know, is coming back alive. David Njoku, and then Austin Hooper. Where are they at in the tight end pecking order? Like, is there number one?
I was doing some studying on this because that was a really interesting question, and it's been really it's not one that's been talked about a ton here. But you think about it, you got Harrison Bryant, who's a sophomore year too, and he's a lot. I like him. Just he's an up and coming sort of younger version of Austin Hooper. David Njoku has been with the Browns the longest. He came in 2017.
There was so much hype about him. Yep.
Oh yeah. And when he got here, his best year was in 2018 when Baker just started, and he and Baker really had a pretty good connection. He had 639 receiving yards, a few touchdowns. And then 2019 rolled around, and Freddie Kitchens got here to Cleveland. And for whatever reason, he and Njoku just didn't, he was benched most of the season, or on and off. So his numbers were down. But the two of them right now, Hooper had his best year. What was it back in? Was it with the Atlanta Falcons? He had a year. He had about 700 yards receiving. But since he's been with Cleveland, the most yards he's ever had. He's been with the Browns. Last year he had 435 yards. This year I think he's got 160 yards receiving. So
yeah. I have him in Dynasty. I'm just not quite sure what to do with him. He's got that name. And you got some of those tight ends that, or will flash every once in a while, will have a name. And
I think it's part of it. The other thing, this whole season with the Browns, just overall, is there's so many different parts to the offense, so many places that Baker Mayfield could throw the ball to. And so you're distributing. It's not like you just have one good player. Now the Browns have all these talented players at tight end, at wide receiver, in the running back field. So, who do you go to now? I would say this, that Austin Hooper, he's not going to be a free agent for a while. He's making $4 million this year. Njoku, he's making $6 million this year. He's a free agent, I believe, at the end of this year. I'll be very anxious to see where things go. Obviously that would suggest that Njoku would test the waters and leave, leaving Austin Hooper. I think that, there's a lot of, I don't know if you saw at the beginning of the last week's game. I guess, you go back to them not scoring a lot of points, and the Browns settled for a field goal in that first possession. They had the ball in that game, or at the beginning of that, in that first drive, for 5 minutes. They went down the field. And part of the reason they settled for the field goal was because Baker threw a pass to Austin Hooper that Hooper dropped. What I've said since, and if you were watching the game, not on TV, but you were on the field, Austin Hooper was wide open on that play. He didn't have a defender around him for 10 yards. And Baker Mayfield was beginning the game, and Baker has a tendency to throw the ball high. And it required Austin Hooper to fully extend. And if you watch the play, but people are complaining because they said, well, the ball was going through his fingers. He should have grabbed it. Well, it's 5 feet off the ground. And I'm like, so I'm not going to criticize Hooper as much as I'm almost the pass that Baker threw. Baker has a tendency not to always hit these guys in the numbers. I think that's had something to do with, Hooper's numbers being a little bit down. I blame Baker a little bit for that as well. So going forward, I would say Hooper's got, more time with the Browns. They've got Harrison Bryant in the wings, and I could see Njoku walking, though. I think that Njoku, personally, I think he's the better of all of, I think he's the best receiver. And what he did, that catch he made, Baker threw a great pass to him at the beginning of the year when they played against the Chiefs. It was right on target, right. He didn't have to jump too much. And so we'll see. But I think Hooper's probably, because of his contract, would stay. Njoku might part.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. You talk about, Baker throwing high to Hooper
all the time,
because that's the clip of OBJ, right? Him reaching up, and initially you kind of read about the play, and it's like, well, OBJ was lazy and went up with one hand, but you look at the play, and that was a really high ball, and he was trying to, it looked like he was trying to do one of his circus catches, and it was just way too high. So,
I will say, just from my perspective, I was in the stadium. I was right above the play. Now, I will give OBJ the benefit of the doubt here, because when I saw Baker release the ball, and from my perspective, and obviously I'm not watching it on TV, and I've watched the highlights since, that ball was behind OBJ. He stretched, but the ball itself, I think, was well behind OBJ. So and the thing about that play too was there was a penalty on that play that no one, he got hit. Baker got or there was an offsides or something, so it was a free play. And so if he had made that, they're right down at the goal line. But did not happen. And now OBJ's gone.
Wow. Yeah, it's so interesting because you hear different things and about Baker, in even from like players' perspectives, and that he evidently had gone to OBJ and said, basically to him that this wasn't going to work, and like just that Baker has this,
Mhm.
mentality, humble mentality in the media, but in the locker room,
Oh
it's
yeah.
this is my territory kind of thing. Is that kind of
Well, oh yeah, and the thing about Baker too, that's really, it's a little side note here, but you follow college sports and all of that. So I'm in Columbus, Ohio, the home of Ohio State, the Ohio State University, and the Baker Mayfield came here with Oklahoma and planted the flag
that's
on
right?
the middle of the field. So even though there are a lot of Browns fans that love Baker, but there are a batch of Browns fans that still have this real gut wrenching sort of hate for the guy, because I mean, before he got drafted, we didn't know, and it was like Buckeye fans were really, really pissed off, and yeah, he's got a real edge to him, and I think it's good, and it can be bad. That emotional side of things. I mean, the body language. You saw the video last week when Baker Mayfield ran out of bounds, got hit hard, got picked up the first down, and then he furiously got up and he, got on the field, got all the fans going. He pumped his fists. And that at that moment, in the clip, you see OBJ, no emotion, walking right. And Baker almost punched him in the face when he did that, because he was coming the other direction. I just thought it was just so telling. Obviously, we've talked about it.
That he was invested, and yeah, OBJ wasn't maybe invested.
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, going forward, are the Browns invested in Baker Mayfield, like maybe getting a contract extension, or what's the feeling there?
Yeah, I think the feeling is yes, he'll be extended, or how they go about doing that and how much they're going to pay him. Are they going to put him in the ballpark of Jared Allen and 40+ million? The talk here is more like in the 30 million range. But do they let him go next year and play out, or do they put the franchise tag on him? I think he's got one more year even beyond this season to play out his initial contract. So do they let him do that? There's a 50-50 on that right now. I would say that he'll get signed. It was nice to see Nick Chubb sign earlier on in the year. And more than likely now they'll just wait till the off season. But yeah, Baker Mayfield is our guy. We get into this discussion, and if you want to read anybody wants to read on the Dog Pound Daily, again, I've done some of my articles about the going back, and even great players that the Browns at quarterback have had, like Bernie Kosar and Brian Sipe of years past. Baker Mayfield is blowing away those stat lines. I mean, and I know stats don't mean diddly sometimes, but he's by far, statistically and his longevity so far, and the consistency and the fact that he's been, playing, and now he's, didn't want to sit out but 1 week because he's got a torn shoulder, but he wants to be out there. So, I mean, the guy is really dedicated to his teammates, to the community. So, he'll sign. I'll be interested to see what they do with that, because in the Browns front office, they're very analytical. They're very, smart with their money. So we'll see how it plays out.
Well, and as a Bears fan, I know how important the quarterback position is. So if you find someone who's, competent or even above competent, and it wants to be there and is going to, be a good teammate, hopefully you want to keep them.
Oh yeah. I mean, do you feel that way for Justin Fields now? I mean, are you?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's kind of what I wanted to see. I think a lot of people with the fans, you kind of look at a season, and I knew the Bears weren't going to be Super Bowl contenders. It's just that's off the table.
Right.
And you just want to see growth, and I see that, Justin Fields is making throws, making just amazing runs, last week. The biggest question is coaching, and that makes a difference,
Yep.
So, and what's been talked about with Baker is that he's a really good match with Stefanski, right?
Yeah. And yes. Yeah, absolutely. You think about all of that. I mean, what Baker's gone through since he got here in 2018. Hugh Jackson was his initial coach. I'm sorry, Hugh Jackson's an idiot. He's a moron. I can't sugarcoat it. I mean, some people still think that he knows his X's and O's, and he was just such an arrogant. I mean,
I've heard he's more laid back too. Like he just kind of like he wasn't really a leader either, really. Or
no, I mean at least the information that I would see when he was here was just that way that you lead. I mean, it's not it was like he wanted to be at the top. He wanted everybody to know that he laid back, but he wanted everybody to know that like he was the guy, and that just didn't mesh with Baker Mayfield. And
right,
Baker leaves, and obviously then you think about how all that went down. Hugh Jackson gets fired. The Browns then go down to Cincinnati. Hugh gets picked up by the Bengals to be kind of like their associate or assistant coach. And that's the one thing about Baker Mayfield. I love the kid. I think he's very competitive, but that emotional, cerebral, or that that side, he doesn't. He's not like some quarterbacks that don't showcase that emotion. And will that work long term? And can that get the Browns all the way in through the playoffs and a push to the Super Bowl? I mean, I think everybody was excited at the beginning of the season. Now the team has floundered a little bit, had some missteps, and so now people are starting to question things.
Well, speaking of that, how far away are the Browns from being?
You must you have all these things.
I got them ready.
That's awesome. No. How far are they away? Well, I think everyone was it was a rush to sort of, on paper, we've talked about this in the national media. The Browns are a topic on ESPN and Fox and all these networks, even when they're bad. It's just, we are the center of the universe here in Cleveland. And we like that, even though we have, usually terrible franchises and, yeah, I definitely think that the Browns, with the core of the players that they have and with Baker Mayfield, I think that's, last year, this sort of, Baker doesn't have to do too much. Baker can hand the ball off to Nick Chubb, 20 times a game, Kareem Hunt, another 10 times a game. And really, I know people don't like hearing that he can manage a game, but if he goes back to managing the game, and I kind of, it's a fine line. And in working with Coach Stefanski, it's like, I don't know what's obstructing that this year as much, but they didn't play in front of big crowds last season. There's a lot of things that have changed with last year during the pandemic. The Browns got on these rolls. There weren't people in the stadiums. It was just them. I mean, for God's sakes, their coach was in the basement at his house for the playoff game that they won against Pittsburgh.
That's right. I forgot about that.
So yeah, I think the Browns are, obviously they got to the playoffs last season. Now, there's a lot that has to go into them getting into the playoffs this season again. Stefanski's not going anywhere. So let's say there's a bump in the road, and let's say they don't make it to the playoffs. Can they make it back? Yes. And then a Super Bowl? Yeah, I think for sure. I think Baker Mayfield, he'll get another extended contract with the team. And I think within that next window of time, between now and the next 4 or 5 years, can the Browns get there? Yeah. I mean, when the Chiefs went to the Super Bowl, and then they got back to the playoffs, and then they got to another Super Bowl, everyone was like, oh my gosh, the Chiefs they're never going to get beat again. Like, they're the best team on the planet, in the world. We've never seen a team like that. And now it's like, they're fumbling, they're bumbling. And
yeah, it can change really quick, but
very quickly.
And a big part of it is the defense. With the Chiefs, I mean, that's really been their Achilles heel. And then, Mahomes has had to do so much, and then, then making all these interceptions. And
the Browns should have beaten the Chiefs. If you go back to week 1, really the Browns, I was there. I went to Kansas. I was in Kansas City for the game. And they controlled that tempo of that game until the very last 8 minutes of the game, 10 minutes of the game. And then everything, all hell broke loose. And they weren't able to win. And Mahomes in that game, I mean, he chucked the ball to can't remember the receiver, the guy that catches all.
Hill, Tyreek
Hill. Yeah, and if you recall, he was being scrambled out of the pocket and basically threw a pass like underhanded, like 50 yards it seemed like, and that John Johnson, the Brown safety, basically just over pursued and couldn't recover. So if that play doesn't happen, because at that point the Browns had just taken that big lead, Chubb, I think, got the touchdown, and they had like a 12-point lead, 13-point lead with 10 minutes to go in the game. So anyway.
Yeah. Let's talk about that then.
Oh yeah.
The Browns, I mean, key defensive players. I mean, against the Bears, they dominated, and a lot of that.
Myles Garrett, you're probably having nightmares with Myles Garrett.
I did. I actually turned off the game for a little bit because I just knew there was, a lot of it was on the offensive line, but then a lot of it is on the talent there. I mean, talk about that, and then maybe matching up going forward into the playoffs with like a Chiefs again, or some of those other top teams.
Well, I think first off, I think the Browns need to get back to that one game at a time mentality. So, I mean, if we're talking playoffs, I'm got my fingers crossed. I was a lot more optimistic 2 weeks ago. But they have the talent. Myles Garrett is having a phenomenal season. He has 10.5 sacks, and he had, I think, 4 of them against you guys in Chicago against the Bears. But I digress.
Lost count, by the way.
No, he's on a mission, and having Jadeveon Clowney now in the mix. I mean, I think he has 3 or 2.5 sacks on the season. People thought that he was, past his prime and stuff, but he's had some injuries a little bit. All the players have had a lot of injuries on the defensive side, but that's going to continue to get better. We got still, half the season left, and I think Garrett he'll continue to lead the league. I don't know what he'll end up with. Maybe he gets to 20 sacks in the season. I really like Greg Newsome. A lot of people have talked about Greg Newsome, cornerback from Northwest or Northwestern. The thing about the Browns secondary, those cornerbacks like Greg Newsome and Denzel Ward, they had a history of injuries when they were in college, and they're continuing to have those injuries. Ward is really an interesting. There's a lot of talk because he's one of these guys too that the Browns had talked about re-signing. But he's always injured. Like every season, you're always talking about Denzel Ward missing 4 or 5 games. I don't think the Browns continue with Denzel Ward. I think that they're going to let him go eventually. I think that they've got Greg Newsome right now, and he's really doing well. They've got the other guy, Greedy Williams, who had this crazy shoulder injury where it was muscular last year, missed the whole season, has come back and played a really good, solid season since he's been back. These veteran guys that the Browns have on that they picked up in the offseason, this John Johnson III, Troy Hill, the teammates from the Los Angeles Rams. A lot of people, including myself, were disappointed with John Johnson. He's had a couple opportunities where he's been burned big time. And a lot of that is breakdowns in communication. There's been a lot of discussion here about Joe Woods, the defensive coordinator. Should he be on the hot seat? I've written about that and said yes. But yeah, I think that the Browns have a really good mix of veteran guys now on the defensive side, young players that are ready to go. And I think the defense is going to continue to get stronger this year. And I think defense wins games. In any sport, my kids play basketball, or whatever sport you're talking about. That's the name of the game. And that's what has been rattled a lot of fans, especially this season for the Browns, is that they've given up these crazy amounts of points, and then they play the Bears and they shut them out. But was that because the Bears offense and their coach were trying to be limited with, Justin Field coming into the game for the first time, didn't want to hit him with too much. So yeah,
all of that. Yeah. I think it's definitely a combination of both. And when you look at the defense, are the linebackers, is that kind of the weakness of the defense? Or
yeah, well, and then then you talk about Jeremy Owusu-Karamoah, who phenomenal guy from Notre Dame, and he's everything that everyone was expecting and hoping for. Kind of not a real big guy. If you see the guy on the field, like I've been at the stadium a few times, it's like, man, this guy's not really that big. But he's one of those sort of hybrid players that can do the linebacker, can drop in coverage. So the Browns and has speed to beat teams like the Chiefs. So he got injured. Unfortunately, he's out for several weeks, and that's a huge issue. Anthony Walker, the Browns picked up from the Indianapolis Colts last year, who was the play caller on defense for the Colts, team leader. Comes over now to the Browns. Did pretty well last game. Broke up a pass or two against the Steelers. So I like what I'm seeing with the Browns linebackers a little bit more. But linebacker is another spot that's going to be needed. We're looking at draft needs. But yeah, I think there's a lot to. I would getting Jeremy Owusu-Koramoah back will be. We call him JOK now because no one can pronounce his name. So,
yeah.
Or the Joker, or so getting him back will be really good for the Browns because he was really causing a lot more chaos for the offensive side of the ball when they play their opponent.
Absolutely. Well, you talk about the draft now. You said, linebacker, receiver. Talk a little bit about, some of the draft needs. And then the other question, will Kevin Costner be making one of the picks as well?
I wish. I mean, draft day
That's
day
one of my favorite movies. I love it.
Oh my God. Oh yeah. The scene when he's talking at the end about the pancakes, it's just classic. I think, Browns, Cleveland sports fans have been treated to some great movies, Major League for baseball.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about that. Major League comes out and then the Cleveland Indians start.
Filmed in Milwaukee, by the way.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Milwaukee County Stadium, correct?
Yep. And a lot of the different bars in the area too. Yep.
Wonderful movie. And then of course the Indians at that time then started in 1995. I think the movie came out in like 93 or 94. And then the Indians have had a huge run of success. Now they're the Guardians. Okay. But, I think, and then, draft day comes out and now the Browns have kind of turned the corner. Will Kevin Costner make a call? I mean, maybe that'd be fantastic. But no, I would say probably the cornerbacks. You can never get too many or too few cornerbacks, especially with, like I just said earlier, Denzel Ward getting injured all the time. Greg Newsome has had a history. If you go back to Northwestern too, he was injured there. The linebacker spot can always be. We need quicker linebackers. Kids like the Joker from Notre Dame and wide receiver. Obviously now I think Donovan Peoples-Jones and Rashid Hollywood Higgins will have opportunities. And if Jarvis Landry stays, great. But the Browns are still going to need another wideout. They need some guys with some height. I think I was reading, I can't think of the name. There's a kid out of Arkansas. And I don't know the kid's last name. I have to go back and look, but he's going to be available in this upcoming draft. And I should have written it down, but I didn't. But he's tall in stature, has had a good season with Arkansas so far. So,
yeah, when you look at some of those players, and I haven't had a chance to kind of really look at a lot of the players. I mean, you've got other than my Iowa guys, you got center Tyler Linderbaum, and it seems like the Browns.
So who do the Browns need? Yeah, who would the Browns need to take from Iowa? Who?
Well, I mean, that would probably be it.
Okay.
He's kind of the guy, and we've got some solid younger players coming up, and I'm not sure who will kind of come out, but
I think our offensive line, we have a pretty solid offensive line, but we've had some injuries there. Defensive line, we've got some older guys, Malik Jackson, McDowell. These guys have come in and done really well or decently. But a couple of these guys have been around the league for a while. And so, I think the Browns have got to go defensive linemen early in the draft as well. Mm-hmm. I think they have picks 1 through 6 this year. One pick in each round. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's definitely going to be interesting. I could, talk, all day about this. I definitely appreciate you joining me.
Yeah.
John Suchan, I'll get that right this time.
Absolutely. And I have a podcast called the Johnny Cleveland Podcast. So check that out. I'm on Twitter and Facebook. I also have TikTok now too. I don't know if you saw any of the countdown. We were doing a countdown on TikTok to the beginning of the season. So if you want to, on TikTok, it's the Johnny Cleveland Podcast, and you can see the old countdowns. We had a lot of fun with those. So all the kids, they love TikTok. So we thought we'd try our hand at that too.
That's what I hear. That's awesome. Well, thanks again. And we'll definitely have to connect, later on the season, draft time. I've learned a ton, and definitely going to be checking out the podcast and your writing. So
yeah, please do that on Dog Pound Daily.
Well, once again, this has been NFL Outdated Cover 2 series on the Cleveland Browns, and thanks again. And
appreciate the time.
You want to say go Browns, or how do you want to
go Browns?
Thanks again.
Okay, take care.